Session 1 of God is Merciful. Jonah, chapter 1, verses 1 through 6, verse by verse study. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for the wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken up. Then the mariners were afraid, and every man cried out to his God, and threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten the load. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest parts of the ship, had laid down, and was fast asleep. So the captain came to him and said to him, What do you mean, sleeper? Arise, call on your God. Perhaps your God will consider us so that we may not perish. Flight plan. Think for a moment that you are a pilot for a major airline. You arrive at the airport and are given instructions to fly out to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. You decide that you don't want to go there. Therefore, you do your own thing. How do you think that's going to go over? Well, here's what I learned. Before a commercial plane can take off, a flight plan must be submitted. It must detail where you're going, where you're leaving from and arriving to, estimated time of takeoff, and when you expect to land. It even consists of alternative plans in case of emergency. There is a lot that goes into ensuring a safe arrival of that plane. The same goes for when God instructs us to do something. Every time God instructs us to do something is as if God is giving out his spiritual flight plan. And as we begin our study of Jonah, pay attention to God's instructions for him. Now back to the text. So, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, when you hear those words, this verse established Jonah as a mouthpiece for the Lord. The name Jonah is actually Yonah, spelled with a Y, and that name translates to dove. A dove throughout history has been known to represent peace. Doves had a history within Scripture of being trustworthy enough to be sent out on assignment and return until the task was complete. This is what happened with Noah and his family upon the ark. In their case, the dove was obedient to go out to see if the waters had receded after the flood. And you can see that in Genesis 8, verses 8 through 12. Now, I can spend hours talking about how names are prophetic and how you should be careful not to let people call you anything. But for now, I want you to think about Jonah's name and how it speaks to how the Lord desired to use him. A dove, one capable of taking flight, one known for being dependable, able to be sent out and trusted to go until the mission is accomplished. Think on that. Moving on to verse 2. It says, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Arise and go. God has given Jonah his marching orders. The language here used in verse 2 has come up before me, alludes to God being in the seat of judgment. Their wickedness has come up before me. The Lord let it be known exactly what was being charged against Nineveh: wickedness. Note that he never says what their punishment will be or how he desires to handle this space, other than his command to Jonah to arise, go to Nineveh, and cry out against it. Verse 3, it says, "But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord." Let's back it up again. It says, "But Jonah." The "but" there lets us know that what we are about to read conflicts with what we just read. But the statement that follows that "but" means that it cancels everything else that just preceded it. Jonah, he arose all right. He arose and he fled. It has to be said here, half obedience is still disobedience. Jonah arose only to flee. He went completely opposite of the direction that the Lord told him to go. And pay attention here to the word used after "from the presence of the Lord." It says Jonah went down. The man called to arise went down. Verse 4, "But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken up." I can sum up verse 4 by saying you cannot outrun God's call. Even the very thing that Jonah used to flee from God is subject to God's voice. And then we get down to verse 5. "Then the mariners were afraid, and every man cried out to his God, and threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten the load. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest parts of the ship and had laid down and was fast asleep." Where is Jonah? Not only did Jonah go down into the lowest part of the ship, but Jonah laid down and was fast asleep. I find it interesting that right after this verse talks about how the other men in a panic have thrown out everything weighing the ship, and then it says, "But Jonah." Sometimes it's not the stuff that's weighing the ship down. Sometimes it's who you got riding with you in the ship. But Jonah canceled that whole statement before that. They threw out everything weighing them down except for Jonah. If you know this story, I'm sure there's already a light bulb going off there. I didn't have that one in my notes, but think about that. But Jonah. This leads me to a conclusion that when you want to go against God, not only do you take you down, but you risk taking down everything that's around you. Think about that. Verse 6, and this is our last chapter for today's session. "So the captain came to him and said to him, 'What do you mean, sleeper? Arise, call on your God. Perhaps your God will consider us so that we may not perish.'" You may not want to obey God, but as this verse clearly shows us, you will obey someone. Jonah is prime example. The captain here was ordering him arise. You didn't ordering him to arise. He didn't want to listen to God's call to arise. But this captain woke him up out of his sleep and made him arise. Not everybody that gives you orders is going to be as gentle as God. Remember that. That one's for free. What's interesting, though, is when the captain tells Jonah to get up, he tells Jonah to call on his God. Jonah was asleep, so he may not have known that these men were not believers at this time. But pay attention to the captain's language. He says, perhaps your God will consider us so that we may not perish. These men were asking for God's mercy. The storm they were facing was no match for the gods that they had already tried. Jonah was their last hope to make it out of this storm alive. Correction, Jonah's God was their last hope to make it out of this storm alive. Even in Jonah's disobedience, the scene still was set for God's mercy to be on display. Ooh. All right, so we'll stop there for session 1. Session 1 summary. God is merciful. Disobedience will have you hitchhiking when God desires for you to take flight. God had Jonah set for a path of elevation, but Jonah chose to catch a ride in the opposite direction. And by doing so, he set himself and the others up for certain doom. The mariners think it is something that they have done, causing them to be in this predicament. They tried all they know to do, but now they're ready to try Jonah's God. Join me back for session 2 as we finish up chapter 1 of Jonah's story with the mariners. Discussion questions. On your handout, you will see the following questions. What character trait or nature of God is being displayed in Jonah 1, verses 1 through 6? How do you define obedience? What does it mean to be disobedient? Read 1 Samuel 15, 22 through 23. How does this passage shed light on Jonah's actions here? Has God ever told you to do something? What was it? What were your initial thoughts and how did you actually respond?